Hi. In this session, I want to talk about puzzle pieces. So, what are puzzle pieces? Um, I'll start by laying down the foundation that God laid down for me. Um, Years ago, I had a conversation with God where He said that in order for a lie to exist, there has to be some amount of truth in it for it to stand on. The foundation of every lie is the truth. There has to be some aspect of truth in it, no matter how distorted, how corrupted it is, there's some truth in it. And this was more so an entryway into me starting to really understand how reality functioned. Was that everything that exists has God in it. No matter how covered up by stuff that's not God like or not God, God still remains as the foundation of all creation. Um, so when I talk about puzzle pieces, right, I'm talking about the things in every culture, in every group, in every area of reality that's God. I'm talking about the life that's in everything, the light that's in everything, the truth that's in everything. Those are God aspects. And I'm not necessarily, my goal isn't to find which group to settle for, which group has the most puzzle pieces, which group is the most valuable. It's not my intention at all. It's not my goal. My goal is to find value where it is, find God wherever He may be able to find the valuable, be able to find the gold. Looking for puzzle pieces is the same, if you would, even though more derogatory, is the same as dumpster diving. And that I'm going into a bunch of places that may be filthy, that may be horrid, may be horrendous, in search for something valuable. And it's the valuable thing that I take back with me. So, you may hear me in many of my teachings talk about a bunch of different cultures, a bunch of different beliefs, religions, things of that nature. Understand that I belong to none of them. My only affiliation is to the kingdom of God and to the royal family of God. It's my only allegiance. Everything else is secondary material at most. Um, I made the decision years ago when I had my reset with God to allow God to be first, and everything else, if it's going to be anything to me, it'll be second. But God leads my life, and that'll be a continue. Like, that is always going to be that way. And in doing so, one of those was my journey out of Christianity. I'll talk about that more in depth in another video. This is really just about puzzle pieces, because you'll hear me mention that, and this will somewhat clear up some things about my teaching style and uh, even the way that I study. Those of you who don't know, I try to study everything. Not necessarily because I believe that everything is valuable, is that I believe that there is value in everything. So, what makes what I believe different from someone who believes that um, a common belief that all religions lead to God or things like that? I don't believe that. I actually believe that all religion is a distraction that keeps you from God. They all have benefits in themselves, but the actual connecting point of starting a relationship with God isn't a religion. It's through intimacy and conversation, direct encounter with God yourself. Um, the only pathway to relationship is the relationship itself. There's no structure for that. So, religion in any form is a distraction, it gets in the way. So, I'm not an advocate of any religion. I study, uh, I've studied and I'm still studying more and more, learning more and more, understanding more and more. And this even goes into my show, The Inner. I'm going to continue to have people on there. I said this before, and I believe it was the episode I did with Johnny Acevedo, where I said that I agree with and disagree with every person that I have had on my show or will have on my show. I don't bring people on my show that I agree with. I bring people on my show who are different, because I believe every person has an aspect of truth that they carry, an aspect of life or light that they carry that we may not find on our own, just in our normal path. This is what makes teamwork so effective. This is what makes it an amazing thing when we meet new people, is that we find aspects of reality, we find aspects of God that we may not have recognized otherwise, but by being seen manifested through this person as they live their life. There's certain things that I may not know now if it wasn't for some of the relationships I now have. And that's just an example of puzzle pieces on a relational standpoint. We all, for the most part, can say that we know something because someone else knew it first and we learned it from them. So if we can understand that, let's just say God's not a Christian, nor is God a Muslim, God's not a Hindu, God's not a Buddhist. But every one of those cultures carries some bit of truth in them. God is truth. So that's the aspect of God that they understand. Is it the fullness of God? No. I don't believe any culture alone carries the fullness of God. I believe they all understand different bits and pieces of who and what God is. Whether they know it or not, whether they realize it or not. I understand it. I realize it. So that goes into what I personally am called to. I'll never put my own calling on anyone else, but like I believe in going out and look. Like I'm graced for that. And it's not even a scary job. I run no real risk of being deceived simply because of how I decide what's valuable. I don't think about what's valuable. I don't decide that for myself. I'm not the one that does the judging in that aspect. I wait for God. I ask God a lot of questions. I say, God, what do you think about this? And then God will tell me what he thinks about different things. And that's the stance that I take. It's purely led off of my relationship with God. I'll actually share a little bit of how I ended up studying ancient Kemet and different African studies. It started one day. I was laying on the floor in my office and I was in study mode that day. So I was listening to a bunch of different audiobooks of a bunch of different sacred texts from a bunch of different religions. And I remember that day I listened to some of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and the Dhammapada. And I was just waiting to see if God jumped on anything. And at least in that session, nothing. I was listening and listening and listening. And I was bored, but this is what you do when you're looking for puzzle pieces. I understood when I bought most of those physical copies that it's possible I bought this whole book and will read this full book just to get 6 paragraphs out of it. That's a possibility. But I remember I was laying in my office listening to audiobooks and I had finished, well, I don't want to say I finished, but I moved through several of them. And eventually I got to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which I now know isn't its real name. But I was listening to the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the presence of my God started to manifest. And I was like, wait, you know them? Really? Okay, something's going on here. Finally, we got action. God's highlighting the Egyptians. And that's when I really started to study ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, and really start to understand their spiritual science because God started to vouch for it. I didn't start with the perspective that all things lead to God, so any practice is safe. No, I take everything back to God. I have God examine everything. It's a slow process. I move at the speed of my own relationship. I move at the speed of intimacy. I move at the speed of understanding. I don't want just answers. I want to understand. Even if I don't agree, I still want to understand, which is really another benefit of my show, is that every person I will ever have on my show, I'm going to disagree with them on something. It's not about agree or disagree. It's about were they able to fully express themselves in a way that someone who doesn't know them can understand them and their culture. It's more of my goal. Yeah, my goal isn't necessarily to agree with everybody. Because that's really the conception of what the inner is about. I don't want to hear Christians teach me about Hinduism. I want to go find Hindus to talk about Hinduism. I don't want Hindus to teach me about Buddhism. I want Buddhists to do that. I want people who actually live in those cultures to tell me about that culture from the inside. Not someone looking from the outside, still trying to prove that their pathway is the best. No matter how good it is, it's limited. If it's a religion, it's limited. If it's a spiritual practice, a lot of times it's still limited. Especially, I don't want to talk about that. But if you've read my book, you know that I classify a lot of things very differently. And that's because I've spent time getting to discern and properly sort things. And honestly, one of the great things about doing this type of work with puzzle pieces is that I don't really have to sort much myself. Things fall in line when they're next to each other. I do end up with some threads that are, in some cases, never before heard of or unfamiliar or unique. That doesn't make them wrong. I try to be as honest as possible when I'm sharing so that people don't think that it's God taught me this when it's a situation where this is a conclusion I've come to. I try to be very specific in my wording. If it's a situation where God taught me something, I'll say, God told me this. For example, it was God that called me out of Christianity. It was Yeshua who pretty much dismantled Christianity for me. He dealt the finishing blow. That's in its own session. But that's really the work of what it is to to search for puzzle pieces. If I wanted to talk about it in a Hebraic context, I talk about Zebulon, one of the sons of Israel, who was the merchant. He was the seafarer who knew where to go and how to find valuables. And I believe it's a special grace that I am currently walking in, but is actually something that is available for everyone who lives by the Spirit, to be able to walk in that Zebulon dimension, which enables them to be able to find the value. Be able to find the value in unlikely places. That's why I call it dumpster diving sometimes. If you've read the introduction to my book or the beginning of my book, I talk about that. You've got to be able to look past, in a lot of cases, your own filters, your own biases, and find where is God? Where is God in this situation? And that's my goal. If I understand that God is everywhere, that means there's not a place that he's not, which means he can't fit all the way in Christianity. He's got to be somewhere else too. Otherwise, he wouldn't be omnipotent. He'd be at most nigh. So you have to be able to discern God where God is. Not just that God is everywhere and then we close case on all of this, but where is God within everywhere? What part of everything is God? I've talked about this topic a lot. Many different things that I've dropped here and there throughout this brief teaching, I guess. can all be found on Patreon. I've talked about finding the God in all of creation and things of that nature. It's really an aspect of love to be able to function as God. Finding God is to find yourself, and if you choose to look at it that way, is to be able to find yourself in everything. To be able to find God in everything. So, just as a reminder, no, I'm not a Christian. I used to be. Was in Christianity for a long time. I'm still friends with a lot of Christians. But the kingdom is my family. I may end up being friends with Hindus, Buddhists, and everything else. Because it's more about understanding and finding the value than it is about trying to prove which culture is the best, which culture is right over another. My goal is God, not the system. Stuff like this makes me wonder how good my next book is going to be. I'm already hearing a bunch of testimonies about my book that came out already, Fullness, Guide to Sonship and Mysticism. The little bit that I've learned since I finished writing that book in August is enough for its own book. So I can only imagine, and yes, but when I write another book, whenever God tells me to start working on the next book, a lot of the individual puzzle pieces that I've gathered will be in that book. I'll continue to share the puzzle pieces that I have, because that's the thing. Let's say that God is a puzzle. Every person is a piece. Some of us don't necessarily fit together, but that doesn't mean we don't fit in the rest of the puzzle. I won't over-explain that. I'd rather let you meditate on that. But I don't want to drag this out. For more of my content, I'll continue to upload on YouTube. There's a Facebook group. There's a Patreon. All my links, well, my important links, the Discord community where we communicate with each other, we fellowship, we talk. It's a real community. That's in the description, and so is my Patreon. Yeah, if you want to get my book, the links to my book are also in the description down below. But that'll be it. I don't want to drag this out. Y'all be blessed. Later.